From Washington, this is the HPS Macrocast with Hamilton Place Strategies and Markets Policy Partners.
Good morning. It's Tuesday, November 23rd, and this is our annual special Thanksgiving Black Friday episode of the Macrocast. We're excited to have John Dick back with us today from Civic Science. I'm Tony Fratto. John Fagan, Brendan Walsh from Markets Policy Partners are here. And guys, this is always like one of our favorite shows of the year because we get to get John Dick on the air. We get to take a look at Black Friday. We want to get into that. We want to first note that news that we've been waiting for a while finally came yesterday with President Biden renominating Jerome Powell, Jay Powell, to be repeat his term as chairman of the Federal Reserve. And also to nominate Lael Brainard, who many consider to be in contention for the top job, to be vice chair of the Fed. I think probably odds were, we talked about it on the show quite a bit. It's probably what we sort of settled on as the most likely outcome, and definitely provide some stability to those, Fed watchers, if you're trying to anticipate which direction they're going to go, a familiar voice and a familiar direction, leadership that is experienced and technically sound and well understood. Probably the right choice, right?
Certainly the easy choice.
Yeah.
I think he'll have a much easier choice, odds of getting appointed. He'll probably get 75, 80 votes, where Lael Brainard probably would have been a 50-50 split, right?
Yeah, she might have been able to pull a handful of Republicans to vote. I think doing them as a package actually, makes
that
a
would
lot
help.
of sense.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. You'd have to have if you're voting for Powell and not voting for Brainard as vice chair, you'd have to really explain, what you think the big difference is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think it would have been supremely risky to go outside the Fed.
Yeah, it didn't seem like that was even on the table.
Yeah, with the macro backdrop as it is, clearly the path of least resistance is renominating Powell, as you mentioned. On Capitol Hill, the path of least resistance is nominating Powell, and Powell has done affirmatively a good job. I think it's hard to argue that he hasn't, even at, one would say, maybe like the lowest point of his chairmanship, that pivot in late 2018 from tightening sort of abruptly and almost quite suddenly into easing. I think he still communicated that shift very well. He's had to change gears in a way that some of his predecessors haven't, and so he's I think there are always more chapters to be written, because we all saw what happened to Greenspan's legacy after the fact. But it's certainly a very defensible position. I think that the argument for Brainard would have been stronger, obviously, had the macro backdrop been easier, had the packages gone through the Capitol Hill in a different way, and maybe if the liberal wing of the party had played hardball on this as something that they really wanted to have, it might have forced them into it. But when you see the Fed, it's just expanded its remit. It's got its dual mandates, but it also now has addressing inequality, an environmental sustainability agenda. These are things, as the powers and remit of the Fed expand, the more an executive is probably looking at the beyond sort of the economic bona fides and into some of the more political and sort of philosophical beliefs that would animate a Fed chief. And so I think it was understandable why, even under the circumstances when Powell was such a layup in some ways, that this would be a challenging decision.
But the narrative kind of got a little weird, where it was like Jay Powell is like the most conservative, right-wing economists in the world, and Lael Brainerd is the most liberal. I mean, when I listen to both of them, it seems like they're on the same page. I mean, Lael's probably a little center left, but I wouldn't call her the most progressive person I've ever met.
Yeah, I think they're both centrists with long experience and well known, and if the criticism of Powell coming from both the left and the center right is that he was a little too much of a dove. The criticism of him from the far left progressive wing is that the Fed has not sufficiently clubbed banks like baby seals, the way they.
And that's really what it is. Warren's criticism of him, he's a dangerous man. We just went through a global pandemic and our banks came through, with flying colors. And really the only thing that he did while chairman was like they had a slight adjustment to the Volcker rule. It wasn't like he massively went weak on the banks,
Yeah, I would have repealed the
tweaks here and there.
So, I would have repealed the Volcker rule. I think,
right.
The most you could say is they tweaked it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, look, it's done. I think we're going to be, we get to talk about, Jay Powell for a good while. By the way, Lael Brainerd, sits there, still available for the next available major economic job, which I think you can only anticipate would be Treasury Secretary. If you think, Janet Yellen isn't going to stay longer than 2 years.
It seems like a normal time frame for her to do it. She answered the bell. She took up the cause, but I'm not sure that she's looking to be a career Treasury Secretary,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's very, Mnuchin stayed Mnuchin stayed for all 4 years. That was very unusual. Treasury Secretaries usually don't last longer than just a couple of years. So,
and without the pandemic, I'm not sure that he would have.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and maybe also the challenge of actually getting someone who can get confirmed.
True. Yeah.
In this environment, but look, Lael is going to get confirmed as vice chair. I think it's going to be a bipartisan vote, maybe not quite with the large bipartisan vote that Powell gets, but it actually puts her in a very nice position should that opportunity come up. I think she'd be the odds-on favorite, and for that job, and a pretty non-controversial Treasury nominee if she gets that opportunity.
I agree. I think that things probably worked out for the best in terms of her career path.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, could we just do 30 seconds on? I'm going to ask you guys just about, you saw the SPR announcement this morning. The president releasing 50 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This is going to get us into a little bit of inflation and what what consumers are thinking about heading into Black Friday. Clearly a defensive move to try to signal that the White House is doing everything it can. Nobody hates the Strategic Petroleum Reserve more than I do. It shouldn't exist. It has no strategic national security or strategic economic value. It's overwhelmingly a messaging device that all White Houses use, including the White House I served in. Every president has used it in one way or another, and I would say overwhelmingly for messaging. It's a rhetorical trick, not an economic trick or a national security trick. But that said, what are there's usually some daily movement in markets. Have you guys seen anything? Is it are people paying attention?
Well, it's kind of a classic right now. Usually it's buy the rumor, sell the news. On the rumors of a Strategic Petroleum Reserve release, it's the opposite. It's sell the rumors and buy the news. And so the sense that that this is now, the headlines are out there. The U.S. came out and said it was coordinated between China, Japan, South Korea, and India. And India had announced its relatively modest release earlier this morning, or the report had come out. And so this had been pretty well flagged. And so when you see dynamics like that, this is the kind of buy the dip opportunity, or the short sellers that were anticipating this announcement begin to cover their shorts. So you don't want to give too much credence to the bungee jump effect that we're seeing in prices. They went from losses early in crude oil to up about 1%, but certainly not as high as they've been, in the past few weeks. We've had about a 3 to 4 week decline in oil prices on the back of this. It's not just pushback from the coordinated governments on the potential for strategic releases. It's also concerns about growth, particularly in Europe, with lockdowns returning in Austria and some of the other regulations that are going to be tightened in Germany and so forth. So that's certainly an issue as well. Some of the other dynamic is that OPEC came out yesterday and said, if we could readjust our schedule too to counter your we'll see your strategic petroleum and we'll raise you a slower rollback of supply curbs. Their meeting is on December 2nd. That would be a pretty aggro move by the cartel, but they have shown themselves to be pretty very, very proactively in defense of their position.
Yeah, and just that serves as just another reminder that oil is a global market. You talk about differentiating certain kinds of oil and whether so certain kinds of oil make those kinds smaller markets especially for what we use in North America, but not in significant ways. It's a global market. The world consumes about 100 million barrels a day, and we're talking about releasing about 50 million barrels over a couple months. So it's just not that much. It isn't going to have much of a real impact. And as you noted, especially if OPEC has some intention to moderate their output. But it does demonstrate the seriousness with the White House is taking what consumers think about prices and inflation and gas prices and our big question today is how much is that going to influence their buying decisions going into this all important holiday season. We saw Best Buy report today, not great numbers, and I always forget that Best Buy still exists, but there it is. But they didn't report very good Q3 numbers today. John, Dick, let's get you in here. What's the state of the consumer today? What are they thinking, and what's your expectations for retail sales and in the holiday season?
Yeah, I mean, it's Christmas for stats geeks around here. I mean, there's so much. We have a swear jar in the office. We're not allowed to use the word unprecedented, but I'm going to throw $1 in it because there's just this mix of things going on right now that we've never seen before. I mean, first of all, I think the headline is we expect the holiday retail season to be really strong in aggregate. Part of that is driven by the fact that it started historically early, right? People started shopping early, maybe because of supply chain fears or whatever other things may have been driving them. So I think that's going to plow through, to Christmas Day. Black Friday, I honestly have a difficult time putting a finger on it because on one hand, we do know a lot of people who are typically the Black Friday shoppers shopped earlier. I mean, people were throwing around Black Friday deals 2 months ago. The deals that you see for Black Friday are somewhat underwhelming. So like promotions and that are, probably thinner than we would normally see. And part of that could just be pressure on retailers, price pressure and inventory pressure. So they don't have as much margin to play with. So we may not see, quite the staggering Black Friday weekend shopping, but I think over the course of the holiday, the full holiday span, we're going to see numbers up. But that said, what I'm paying closer attention to is post-Christmas. Are we seeing early signs now of bleak times coming after the holiday? And there's definitely a lot of that. The last time I was with you, we talked about how the consumer was in a relatively strong financial position still coming out of the pandemic and still sort of living off the exhaust of their stimulus payments and child tax credits and so on. And what we were beginning to see was more fear for the future than sort of concerns for the present. And that's starting to erode a bit. One of the questions we've been tracking since the beginning of the pandemic is, are you better or worse off financially than you were before the pandemic. And like this past March, the better off group started climbing way past the worse off group. Well, that gap's shrinking now. People are starting to look at their personal finances and say, like, this isn't just about a forward outlook concern. I'm starting to actually feel the pinch of more expensive grocery bills and more expensive fuel at the pump. And there's no immediate, I don't think 50 million barrels of oil is going to solve that problem. We haven't seen that yet in our data. Obviously, it just happened. But, I just really quickly, I'll address the Best Buy thing. Best Buy, I give a little bit of a pass because they're looking at like year over year comps. And if you think about where people were last year, it's just a really hard number to get past. I mean, how many TVs do people need to buy? Right.
Yeah.
And so
that's a great point. Yeah.
But I think there's just a lot of tension between what we see as the immediate reality, which is an enthusiastic consumer about their personal finances largely, and the holiday season. I think that's we're going to see a lot of resilience through Christmas, but I don't feel great about what happens after that.
One of the things, John, that we noticed looking at the economic sentiment index is a slight boost, coming out of the Thanksgiving period. Are you expecting that again?
Look, if the ESI is a measure of hope and fear, possibly. There's good, the job numbers are decent. I think people are pretty positive post, the stimulus, Biden stimulus bill looking like it's got momentum, all those things. Like, I
think there's something to a shopping high. Like there is such thing as you probably do get a shopping. I don't know how long it lasts. I don't think it lasts very long, but
yeah. And you just get a general holiday season high, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing that's unparalleled is, cases rising and above the Mason-Dixon line again, and is that going to people start worrying a bit about, are we going to see lockdown? I mean, we see lockdowns in Europe. I don't think anyone has the political will to do that here again, but are people, watching those rising cases in the North and Northeast, and does that affect hope and fear? One thing that kind of really has jumped out at me looking at our data just in the last couple of weeks is a rise in the percentage of consumers who say they're making most of their purchases with credit cards. It's only been about a 2-week trend, so maybe it's a blip, but if it's not, it's a big deal, because if people are now saying like, I'm not as confident in my personal financial situation to continue paying things in cash and with my credit card or my debit card. And I'm going to will myself through the holidays on my credit card, that those chickens are going to come home to roost.
That's interesting. How long have you asked that question, John?
Oh, like since 2011.
Really?
Yeah, there's a little bit of seasonality to it for sure. But it's actually starting a little earlier than we normally see it. Normally we'd start to see that kind of Black Friday and forward, not 2 weeks before Black Friday.
Interesting.
Right. So I'm not necessarily willing to like hang my hat on it as a fundamental truth just yet, but to see that line go up, to see that line go up 2 weeks in a row is, pretty meaningful. And we ask a lot of other sort of related questions about how do you feel about the amount of debt you have today? And do you expect to have more or less debt going forward? Those trend lines are corroborating the credit card usage line. People are just sort of like, I expect to probably have to go into a bit more debt. And then you compound that with, we talk about oil prices and fuel prices so much because, we see the numbers at the pump, but where that really shows up is home heating bills too. Right. And if we have a cold winter, that's going to pinch. And then the last sort of big thing, not last, but one of the other big things that, sort of out there on the horizon is the student loan payments returning in January, which if, people who carry student loan debt, 70% of them are at least somewhat concerned about what that's going to mean to their household expenses come January. And that's just another potential headwind post-Christmas that we have to watch.
You mentioned the sort of doorbuster, price cuts that we usually see on Black Friday and what's Cyber Monday. Seems like so old fashioned to talk about Cyber.
Yeah, I think that may have been shelved. They may have been shelved as a buzz term. I think it's just all Black Friday at this point. I mean, when we're calling something Black Friday deals in September, I'm pretty.
It's everything.
All bets are off. I think in terms of the literal definitions. Yeah.
But it's look, what we're hearing, at least anecdotally, from retailers and is that, and from reporters who are covering that space, analysts who are covering that space, is that retailers are not feeling, they don't feel like they need to lower prices to get people through the door. That like they are not feeling pricing pressure. They feel like, maybe they could do a couple things to catch your eye, so that you choose, Kohl's over Target, maybe. But that once you're in the store, they're not moving prices much. They feel, demand is pretty strong, and balance sheets, whatever direction they're going, is sufficiently healthy that people are going to buy the things that they want at prices that are going to allow them to keep, maintain their margins during this period. I don't know, John and Brendan, if you guys are hearing differently on that.
Yeah, I think the retail earnings that came out, I mean, that was really what was the tale of the tape when Walmart and Kohl's and some of the others came out last week. It was really about, pretty I think pretty adept management to keep the shelves stocked and protect margins and adapt essentially to this environment. Now, these are huge retailers that reported last week, but they would have the wherewithal to accomplish something like this. But it's certainly it's an environment that is that certainly pose some challenges, and the longer it goes on, the tougher it gets, and the more entrenched some of these issues might be. But the sort of rude health of the retailers and their supply chain magic that they're able to work in some of these cases, I think is it's pretty telling how well they've performed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think enough of this was by design to call it anything other than luck for the retailers, that the timing of all of this is working out so that it can just get them across the finish line for Christmas. I think a lot of the, again, the sort of the residual financial gains that the average household has experienced over the last 16 or so months, or particularly just the last year, we seem to be kind of seems like last call for alcohol right now, like people just in time for Christmas, and then the dark times come after, which is a lot better than it happening a quarter sooner, right? Than we see it now. And you're right. I think the retailers know they don't need to do price cuts to get people into their stores for Black Friday, because again, the average consumer is still pretty bullish. But another thing that we're beginning to see early signs of is rising price sensitivity, which will again maybe not necessarily hit the balance sheets in December, but it's coming. I just, unless something's fundamental changes, I think it's definitely on its way.
Well, I think everyone should be prepared to be surprised, right? Because even on look, John Fagan mentioned the what some of the big sophisticated retailers have been able to do with some of their supply chains to get things in and shelves stocked during this period. And we were predicting real shortages. And we don't know what that means for smaller retailers, whether they've been able to. It doesn't seem like they've been able to.
Yeah, that's the good point. The big guys have been able to get it by, but anecdotally, it's the smaller stores that are having the hard time.
Exactly. Yeah. But look, I mean, we don't know what, if you think about the sort of, what can worry you about this next period. I think it is some of what John Dick is talking about with, the sentiment turning in a much greater way on inflation. That could be a surprise, maybe not to John, but certainly to the way a lot of people are looking ahead right now. That could be a surprise where we see, not as robust spending as some have expected. The others, look, I mean, there seems like a bit of foreboding right now with something else John Dick mentioned, which is, the increases in COVID cases in the Northeast, people heading inside, and now we're all going to go to, we're all putting together our super spreader events for Thursday evening, with a population that's still not as vaccinated or as boosted as they ought to be, and what impact that could have then on the holidays, going into the holiday season, the rest of the holiday season, into the December, January period.
Well, I go to the grocery store 2 days ago, and well over half of the people in the store aren't wearing a mask, right? I think, the consumer who seems to be accepting whatever the consequences of their actions are going to be at this point, and maybe they'll just sort of accept that people are going to get sick and continue to plow through it. But I mean, everything that we've seen for the last year and a half is that when cases begin to go up dramatically, and that makes it into the news, consumer confidence is immediately impacted by it. Even if true actual economic circumstances aren't affected by it, we know that sort of economic outlook is. I will say one area where I think we may see a canary in the coal mine over the next 5 to 6 weeks, both because it's sort of the front line on COVID, but also because it's sort of the front line on controllable consumer spending, is restaurants. When we get together in like January and February and we look back on this, and you can maybe tell me I ended up being wrong about all of it, but early signs suggest that people are beginning to think twice about going out to eat, not just because of COVID, but because it's the one area of expense that we can control, right? We know there's great research going back, 70, 80 years that shows the correlation between restaurant spending, the inverse correlation between restaurant spending and fuel prices, right? Fuel prices affect everybody. Going out to eat is the easiest thing for the typical household to limit, right? When you're thinking about Christmas and you're like, I want to make sure I buy all the gifts for everybody, or I need to do the traveling that I plan to do for the holidays, those feel like necessities. Eating out at restaurants doesn't feel like a necessity, and it certainly doesn't feel like a necessity if you feel it's unsafe to eat indoors at a restaurant. So that's another thing we're going to watch really closely over the next 5 to 6 weeks, is how do the restaurants fare, and is that sort of the leading edge of what might be some austerity coming around in January and February. Something to pay attention to.
And John, one last question for me is, I'm curious about the travel sector also. Do you have any sense of, whether, it seems like people are getting back to flying. But do you have any sense of, where, airlines, hotels, resorts, how they're feeling about the future here?
Well, I think, I'll answer two questions. One is how they feel about the present, which I think is okay. I think the numbers are obviously up over where they were last year. They're, a few percentage points shy of where they were in November, but I think it's still part of the same phenomenon. I think you've got a lot of people who committed to traveling 2, 3, 4 months ago, bought their airline tickets, reserved their hotels, whatever they did. And they're going to just, COVID be damned, going to do it anyway. Ask me how it's going to look on the other side of that. When you take into consideration both, rising price sensitivity and strains on household finances, but then also COVID. I don't know. I wouldn't be terribly bullish on the future for the next few months, at least. But I think the backward looking last quarter or so, I think, has been pretty positive. And I think, we'll see a decent number of people travel this weekend, whether they get on a plane or drive. But again, I think it's just sort of really good timing that we're right at this sort of cresting point right now, as opposed to it happening two months ago or so. So I think economically we lucked out. One last thing that will be really interesting to watch in the first quarter is if all of this austerity and household finance strain stuff kind of plays out the way it looks like it might, is what will that do to accelerating people returning to the workforce in the first quarter? When we look at the people who have left their jobs, right, in the recent months, what the sort of great resignation, as it's called, there's a large chunk of those people, they're not retiring, right? They just happened to have some temporary financial freedom that gave them some freedom to leave a job that they didn't like, right? And it wasn't like I'm going to leave the workforce forever, but it's, hey, I'm going to leave for a while, and I'll go back to work when I need to go back to work. If we start to see a bunch of people in the first quarter that need to go back to work, how does that jolt address some of the labor shortage things we talk about? It'll be a really interesting thing to watch.
I think it's one of the big crucial questions that's hanging out there for anyone doing macroeconomic analysis, is that is the labor force participation rate going to tick up, which we all want to see. And
you're talking about as many as 5 million people that could potentially be returning to the labor force. That's not insignificant.
Not at all. And and it skews our view of the economy, because we the inflation, the unemployment rate at what I think is a 4.6% right now.
Yeah, but if you adjust for those 5 million people, we're more like 7.5%.
Yeah. So well, those are the things we're going to be looking for. I mean, when we come back for, do we have jobs?
So we our next, when we do it a Friday from now, we'll have the jobs report.
Yeah, so that's 10 days, 11 days from now, and I think we're going to learn a lot. I think we're going to have a good sense of how this weekend kicks off, and how John Dick's point that like the shopping started so much earlier is how to account for how you would think about this weekend compared to previous years.
Yeah, because just on the news, everyone told you start early. There might not be enough stuff around. So I know we're kind of done.
I remember one of the things that John has said is the earlier you start, the more you buy. I know. And the shelves don't actually empty. And so if you start in September, October, you have that idea, hey, let's the shelves aren't empty. There's still a little bit more. And
Well, I'm still behind. So I still have a fair bit of work to do. So I'll be out there. Not on Black Friday though.
No.
I will be. I'll use this opportunity to remind people. I'll do it on Facebook, as I do every year as well. But if you are putting up a Christmas tree this year, I highly recommend the Crinner XL.
It is so
Christmas
amazing.
Tree stand. It's the greatest Christmas tree stand ever built. It's built in Germany. You can still find it on Amazon. You will never have an easier time putting up a Christmas tree than with the Crinner XL Christmas tree stand. They're not
a little warning. It is also very easy to release it. And my 2-year-old son found that red button when we had a 14-foot Christmas tree back in Connecticut.
You gotta lock it in.
Smash, and he goes, "Daddy, I smashed the Christmas tree."
you gotta lock that lever in.
You gotta lock it in good.
Yeah, you gotta lock it in.
This is going to sound so much like one of those disingenuous podcast commercials, because it's not. But I actually bought one of those things because of you, Tony. So I'm a convert as well. I'm a convert as well.
So good.
I just think of like the years,
and all of a sudden locked in.
It's amazing. It's like it's almost too good to be true.
Yeah.
Except that we've tested it now for 10 years. I own 5 of them in 2 different houses, and we've given them away. They've saved marriages. One of these days, we'll actually get them to sponsor the podcast. Guys, have an amazing Thanksgiving with your families. Thanks for joining us today, John Dick, John and Brendan, and the podcast team. We're thankful for all the work that everyone's done on making the Macrocast work every week. With many of our guests and guest hosts, the great Matt McDonald, who's usually with us on Jobs Day. Wishing everybody a really wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thank you for listening to the HPS Macrocast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and share.